I'm the organizer of this workshop. My name is Xiaojian. I finished my PhD in industrial engineering with a focus on human factors at Purdue 2 years ago. I have been working as a research associate at VTTI since then, and I mainly work on the human factors related projects on automated heavy vehicles at VTTI. And when I just arrived at VTTI 2 years ago, I was assigned with a project called ConOps, which stands for Concept of Operations. It's a FMCSA grant that aims to provide the trucking industry with clear guidelines on how to safely implement, integrate, and benefit from automated driving systems equipped trucks. And cybersecurity issues on automated trucks was one of the major topics under this project. Feel free to scan this QR code here to learn more about the project. During that project, I noticed that no matter how secure and how robust the computer science guys design a system, the weakest link of the security system always lies in the hand of the end users. When we are designing the security system and addressing cybersecurity issues, it's necessary to bring in the perspective of the end users. And that's when human factors come into play. I know a thing or two about human factors, but my knowledge on cybersecurity is still like an infant. I reached out to several grown-ups that I know with some help from CCI, Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, the sponsor of this event, and some help from Mark Zachos at the University of Detroit Mercy. I assembled an incredible lineup of experts, including Mark himself, Brian Burnett at Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Jeremy Daly at Colorado State University, and Shira Hasira at Upstream Security. Each bringing unique insights to the table through their presentations. During the presentations, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box, and we will have a 5-minute Q&A after each presentation to address them. After the presentations, we will have a short interactive session with the audiences. In this session, we will provide 3 questions on the screen, and we want you to do some brainstorming and type your answer in the chat box as well. Lastly, at 11:30, we will have a roundtable discussion among the speakers until noon. All right, enough of me. Let's start with the presentations. Over to you, Mark.
Hey, everybody. Mark Zachos here in Detroit, and appreciate the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you some of the things that we're doing in the space. The human factors, I think, is a good space that needs further exploration. I'm going to start and share with you some of the things that we're currently doing at University of Detroit Mercy, and then step into that new space. So it's kind of the other foot there. So as Xiaojian said, he's more of a human factors guy, and I'm not, but I see the opportunity to bring both together. My background is in engineering. In fact, if you heard anything about a vehicle, something like OBD2 or J1939, I was one of the cohorts here in Detroit that created those standards. So I know a little bit about that stuff, and I can tell you back in the day, we never even thought about cybersecurity. Today, of course, it's very important to the end users as well as the creators of the technology. So I'm going to share with you a couple slides about our work here to do training and education of that next generation, that they can maybe not create the same mistakes technically, that those gaps that we left in those SAE J1939 standards, for example. So this is a course that we have, a 10-course sequence here in vehicle cyber engineering. You get a master's degree, get a lot of background in technology to create safer vehicles, to create engineers, develop engineering skills with those hands-on and with the cybersecurity thoughts up front. Something, again, that I think in my background didn't exist back 25 years ago. So in our courses, we also have a laboratory, and at the University of Detroit Mercy, this is my laboratory that I run. What we've got is different vehicle breadboards, vehicle ECUs. We have portable units. You see the soldiers here in the center. We take those out to local Army bases and truck fleets and do training of technicians and developers and basically awareness of vehicle cybersecurity or vehicle cyber engineering. So the equipment there, I think, is very valuable, of course, to apply to our courses, but then take out to the community and at large and help them understand the importance of vehicle cybersecurity. Now, one of the things that we want to do in our program is we want to expand it to allow that laboratory equipment to be touched and utilized from folks all over the world. So we developed this Amazon Web Service-based cybersecurity training scenario in conjunction with some colleagues at the University of Arizona. So there's an SAE paper on this, but I'm not going to spend any time getting into the details. The point, again, is training and be able to do workforce development. What are those threat mitigations? Going back to human factors and mitigating those threats. Well, education. Don't do what I did, 25 years ago and just be ignorant of the technology gaps that can be exploited in the future. So bringing that forward into technical standards is our next goal. This is another thing that I do in my spare time here, is work on more SAE technical standards. So I told you that I was one of the original developers of the J1939, the SAE J1939 standard. Guess what? I get a second chance, and I'm going back and giving this new standard, J1939-91C. We're going to roll this out very soon into the industry, and it gives the automotive and heavy-duty trucking industry a huge advantage in securing their vehicles. So we have the technology, we have the standardization, and we're going to make things better. Indeed, we're going to virtualize this again. So this goes back to the laboratory in the approach to allow folks to connect to this from anywhere in the world and do experimentation and work on projects in the lab and understand this technology. So when they create new trucks and cars of the future, it'll be much more secure. In my class that I'm teaching this summer, I'm teaching this class, capstone project class. We're actually using that SAE standard and creating a Terra model with it, and along the lines of this standard that I mentioned, create that Terra and then do experiments on that. To make sure, hey, we're not missing something, and that the resilience of the network is as good as we thought. So we get the students to poke at it and learn at the same time and do experiments. Now, I want to be clear that J1939-91C is just the onboard communications. The bigger picture, which I'm sure you've all heard about, anyone in this vehicle space, is this great body of work called the ISO SAE 21434 standard that was rolled out in 2021. And again, it does a life cycle process of designing, deploying, and maintaining vehicles in a cyber secure manner. And backing up, starting this off, we did the Terra threat analysis and risk assessment on and it's standardized in 21434. Well, we've got all these standards now, and we've got some good technology that's going to make things a lot secure throughout the world. Everybody can learn about it, but I guess something that we can't really do much about is the big cyber security threats, guys like me, the human factor here. So that's something that we still need to explore and do a better job on, and maybe we'll never be able to be successful in mitigating that threat. There's always going to be smart people, and there's always going to be clumsy people. Maybe I'm going to hit that wrong button or click it when I should have thought a little bit more about the details before I proceeded with making that mistake and clicking on that phishing email. But even worse, even more challenging is the AI, right? So in my view, we have to train not only the humans, but somehow, some way, and I know there's research being done on using AI as not as a defense mechanism as well. So the cybersecurity threat from a human and a cybersecurity threat from AI, somehow we'll have to approach that together. To mitigate these threats, we go back to training, and here's another thing that's useful for everyone is information sharing. The American Trucking Association has a system called Fleet Cywatch. They gather information from the FBI, from the Auto Isaac, different communities, intelligence communities, and push it out to the trucking industry, to the public, or to those subscribers where you get a little bit more detail. So information sharing is a huge threat mitigation strategy. I hope those fleet operators out there subscribe to Fleet Cywatch or some other similar program. Another mitigation strategy is response and resilience. And so if you do click on that phishing email, you do get ransomed. What do? You have to respond to it and recover. You don't want to be offline for hours, days, and maybe weeks. You have to be resilient. Indeed, I think the attackers will find an opportunity, attack, and if they don't collect enough ransom, maybe they'll move on because you're resilient enough. You're not going to pay the ransom because you're resilient, and your internal response is quick enough that those type of bad actors are going to go find other industries to cultivate. So CISA here has the ransomware checklist. I wanted to make sure you guys all knew that was available. There's lots of free US government resources, and these resources are really, really good. Another resource available is through TSA. This is their Office of Surface Cybersecurity. This is different from the people that make you take your shoes off at the airport. They publish guidebooks and do a lot of things to help protect the transportation industry in the US. Configure your mobile devices. Okay, yeah. So they say here, email settings. We know about the protection and the human factors. Do you do it on your mobile devices too? Yeah, follow some guidelines here about this one's interesting. Pay attention to installing applications. I sure read every instruction, don't you? Everything that's in that licensing agreement. Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of things there that you can learn. Another place to get very good information is an organization here. They're out of Washington, D.C. It's a trade organization, NMFTA, National Motor Freight Traffic Association. The risk about QR code attacks. I'm sure you've thought about that, but this is a great attack vector here. So poor security practices, everybody just clicks on it or takes a photo, you know. And one thing that I want to point out is that we can all kind of formulate this and create some kind of framework. In fact, we do have a framework for the vehicle cybersecurity risks. And here's an extract of the ISO SAE 21434. And my point here is that, hey, how about adding cybersecurity to this framework, something to do with human factors? It's not been done yet, but I think it is important to follow these risks and weigh the impact here of human interaction and the risk, the cyber risk to operating vehicles. So finally, to come back to the laboratory and what we're doing at University of Detroit Mercy, This is a new piece of equipment, is donated to us by the company Mechanical Simulation. So it's a drive simulator. And yeah, you get in that seat and the big screen pops up and you can do vehicle dynamics and testing of control algorithms for your vehicle. But you can also use it for human factors, I believe. And this is something that we're just starting anew at the university and creating different experiments. And the experiment here, I guess, is, should I type that? Let's see, should I hit that button there? Should I somehow type something? My name and password, it just says to verify it. So the human interaction while you're operating a vehicle or connecting something to a vehicle. We actually have a course. It's an undergrad course, 3350 in the computer science department across the campus from me. And we're going to bring some kind of human interaction and problem solving into using the network that's on this simulator. So stay tuned for all of that, and hope you found that interesting and future information. We'll have more discussion as we get further into our agenda. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. We do have a question from Todd. Todd said, where industry role do most of the attendees come from? Academia, manufacturer, customer.
I'm sorry, could you repeat? I didn't.
And Mark, I can jump in because Xiaojian actually gave me control too. I'm part of the roundtable at the end.
Yeah.
I was just kind of curious from an audience perspective, like who is the entire audience here, and also for where you're teaching classes, like I'm a CIO at a trucking company. I'm kind of curious what our audience here is and who your audience is for kind of the research and stuff that you're doing. Is it the manufacturers? Is it the end users? Is it those of us integrating with them? Is it all of that?
From I can address this question. From the RSVP list, most of the audiences are coming from academia. We have I'm not sure how many people actually is in this meeting right now, but from that list, we have people from University of Detroit Mercy. We have people from VTTI, from Virginia Tech, and also we have some PhD students. We have someone from T-Mobile, from DG Technologies, from Gilead, from FMCSA, which is Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and also someone from Old Dominion University, from people from PACCAR, PACCAR. So it's a good mix of different domains.
So Todd, maybe I can also add to that in terms of the classes that you saw briefly there, the outline of the classes. The way that we work at our university is they're all graduate working in industry, in the automotive or trucking or heavy duty vehicle industry, and they take classes at night. So these are the actual engineers doing engineering for OEMs or suppliers, and then they come at night to learn those techniques and engineering, making their skills better.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Next one up, Brian Burnett from Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Brian is going to talk about FMCSA's role and approach in assuring cybersecurity for heavy-duty vehicles. Brian, feel free to share your screen.
Yep, sure. You can hear me okay, right?
Yep.
Cool. Hopefully you guys can see this.
Yes, we can.
All right. So good morning, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to this this call. Excited to be here. My name is Brian Barnett. I am a general engineer with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and I'm going to give you guys some brief details on what FMCSA has done for cybersecurity and the plans moving forward. So just an overview, I'll give you guys a brief history of my background, just so you guys know who you're talking to. Most of you guys probably haven't seen my face before, and there's a reason. I'll give you guys some of FMCSA's mission, then jump into FMCSA cybersecurity history, and then some of our plans moving forward as far as cybersecurity goes. Okay, so I am an electrical engineer by trade. I have both a bachelor's and a master's in electrical. I went to Wayne State University in the heart of Detroit, Michigan. I did a short stint at Ford Motor Company as a systems and integration engineer, plus some design and release engineer work on the side. From there, I jumped into the AV world. So automated vehicles was what I did for the past 7 or 8 years. So I worked at Argo AI, did some hardware integration and early hardware and firmware development and testing, amongst many other things at a startup. And then I went to Embark Trucks, which was an automated trucking company. So that, now I'm at FMCSA. I've been here it'll be a year tomorrow, or in 2 days. So again, I'm a general engineer here. So on to FMCSA's mission. So what we really try to do is reduce crashes, injuries, and fatalities in large trucks and buses. And so we regulate drivers and vehicles through inspections, maintenance, and repairs. And so I work for the Advanced Technology Division, which is under the Office of Research. And so we conduct research that promotes the deployment of new innovative technologies that improve the safety of the highways. And so we focus on 4 key areas for our research. So first is ADAS, so Advanced Driving Assistance Systems. Next is ADS, or Automated Driving Systems. Then you have the roadside safety enforcement technology, which is all the tools that the safety officers use at the roadside or on the side of the highways at the weigh scales. So if they use tire inspection systems, those cameras, those are all kind of promoted by us at FMCSA. And then we have the Innovative Technology Deployment Grant, which is a reimbursement grant funding states to help them operate and maintain their innovative roadside technologies. So some of FMCSA's history in the past is we've sponsored the Cybertruck Challenge for the past few years, which is basically an event where students get together and they try to hack trucks, and it's sponsored by some trucking OEMs. It's a pretty cool thing. I actually saw it for the first time last year. I was pretty blown away by how smart some of those students were. So as of recently, within the last year, our Advanced Technology Division, the group size doubled. So we had more bandwidth to focus on other things besides our normal working activities, and one of those is cybersecurity. And I stepped up to kind of take on that role and working on cybersecurity within the Advanced Technology Division. So right now we're in the really early stages of developing a roadmap for cyber. And so I'll give you guys just a brief overview of what we're looking at. So for one, we're going to try to get to do some more outreach within the industry for carriers and stakeholder, and other stakeholders. Maybe touch on some best practices. For example, we already have the, sorry, I didn't touch on that on the other slide, but we have the best practices for the integration and retrofit of aftermarket telematics devices. So that was published in 2020. We may revisit that. It's only 4 years old, so we may wait before we actually revisit. And so we're going to touch on research on EV charging cybersecurity. As you guys may know, there's, you got the open charge point protocol, and there's some cybersecurity implications with that. We're looking at improving ELDs. This has kind of been a talking point for us for the past few months, is making some improvements to ELDs. And then we're looking at automated commercial motor vehicle cybersecurity. And we actually have some research going on right now that is focused on teleoperations in cybersecurity, and then also smart trailers. Sorry, my kids broke into the office, but can't lock them out. So yeah, that's just a brief touch on what we're doing. This is my contact information. I've always got my ear to the ground listening for more ideas for research and what FMCSA can do as far as cybersecurity goes. So, you know, if anybody has any recommendations or wants to talk about anything, you know, I'm here. So yeah, so if anybody has any questions. So.
All right, thank you very much, Brian. If we don't have any question, we will move on to our next presentation. Speaking of Cybertruck Challenge, Jeremy, you're up. Jeremy Daly is from Colorado University. He will be talking about the cybersecurity considerations of the electronic logging devices, ELDs, on heavy vehicles.
Thank you very much, Brian. It was great to hear your presentation, because I think the what I'm going to talk about fits into your ELD mission as well. And so I see a lot of opportunities here to further this. So anyway, welcome. Thank you. My name is Jeremy Daly. I teach systems engineering at Colorado State University. I'm going to talk today about some research that my students put together on electronic logging devices, or ELDs. And this one is particularly interesting because this particular ELD that we did a deep dive into had the ability to propagate malware by itself. So it was a wormable exploit. We've disclosed it with CISA. The vendor has it fixed. So I'm going to take you through this journey now that that's taken care of. So about myself, I started my professional career in the Air Force, went to Wright State University, worked on mechanical engineering stuff, turbine engines, and then went to the University of Tulsa in Oklahoma, and started getting into traffic crash reconstruction, which led to digital forensics, and specifically on trucks. And those forensic activities kind of opened the door to cybersecurity. And so we saw a need in the industry for solutions for forensics. So started a company called CenterCon Technologies that now I work on with Mark Zachos, and then started the Cybertruck Challenge in 2017. So glad to have FMCSA highlight that as one of their things. So we're grateful for their participation and support. And in 2019, I moved up to Colorado State University to teach systems engineering.
We attempted and succeeded in, as far as we know, the first ever wireless drive-by attack on a truck. We drove up alongside the truck, we reflashed the electronic device, which is running its stock firmware, with a malicious firmware that will slow down the truck once it starts executing. We were successful in this attack. The car drove up alongside it. About 30 seconds later, the truck begins to slow down and the car pulls out ahead. Since it's a wireless attack, it gives us the freedom to explore creative attack vectors, including flying a drone. Critical infrastructure is becoming more and more connected, including trucks. One of the reasons is due to the ELD mandate. And when the ELD mandate first came out, it did not have much security in it. It could use many security improvements. And so here at Colorado State University, we are exploring the security of heavy vehicles as well as the security of the devices attached to the heavy vehicles, such as electronic logging devices.
So that's kind of a 1-minute blurb that is a preview of what I'm going to talk about. So I'll go through the conversation and the research that we did to kind of reveal and understand that exploit. I probably don't have to spend a lot of time motivating this audience on why commercial trucks, but needless to say, it's a very heavy rolling computer with lots of sensors and network components. One of the things that's interesting about trucks compared to cars is you get a lot more horizontal integration, and so we have to follow standards like J1939 for systems to work together. So we have in the example we just showed, a Kenworth truck, but inside the hood is a Cummins engine, and there's Bendix brakes. And so those two companies are completely separate from the PACCAR company, which builds Kenworth. So they all work together and use standardized protocols. And one of those protocols was able to be leveraged to demonstrate the torque and speed control, which is the TSC1 message in J1939, that slowed the vehicle down. So bring in electronic logging devices. So this is a technology that was focused on trying to do a better job tracking driver hours and increase in compliance with the hours of service regulations that existed. It first came out in 2017. I think the first draft was 2015. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of security. And if there was security, it was more focused on the back end and the data records that were stored and served. And so law enforcement has able to have access to those driver records upon inspection. What is overlooked or not present in the regulation was any mention of the device security itself, like what can and can't do. And one of the biggest issues is there was a mandate to request engine hours, and that's not a normally broadcast message. And so ELD makers must have write access to the engine controller over the CAN bus. So that's where most of these do. They connect into the diagnostic port, and there's an interface that they can just work with either through their phone or an installed tablet. So when we, as systems engineers, start talking about systems, we have what we call the system context, and we try to create a hierarchy of this. And so when we define our system, it's the truck and this ELD device. And so when we put those together, either one of them by themselves is just fine, but now we have this emergent behavior, this emergent property that is that has security, right? So cybersecurity is an emergent property from the composition of system components. And so the engineers that put together the Kenworth didn't have a full view of what the system on the road would be, because they couldn't control what gets connected or spliced into those wires. And that's one of the challenges in our industry, in the heavy trucking industry, is the as designed versus the as exists type of argument. Okay, so we actually had kind of a hint that there might be issues with this. So in 2017, I think there was a DEF CON presentation by Corey Tuen that highlighted the potential for cybersecurity attacks. It hadn't been really demonstrated in public at that point, so nobody really did a lot against that. But we took inspiration and looked through it. So one of the things we had to do is come up with some sort of preliminary assessment, right, like a TARA. Now this was somewhat loose. It turns out that hackers don't have to play the TARA rules by the book per se. We just have to be creative and find those vectors, and then the defenders have to actually enumerate the entire space. But our goal was, if we could access the wireless network and then send bad messages, then there's a chance that we could, actually create a wireless attack. And by this time, it turned out there were, I think, 880 different registered ELDs. But the interesting thing about that is most of those ELDs are rebranded or white labeled. And so it's only on the order of a couple dozen in different hardware devices that are used as ELDs. So while this 880 may seem like a big number, the actual numbers of devices are a little bit smaller. Most of the newer trucks have some sort of gateway system to the diagnostic port. However, we've done other research to where you can actually initiate diagnostics to go through those gateways, or like in the case of our box truck, there was no gateway, so we had direct connection to the engine. The other thing is, if a driver suspects there's something wrong with their vehicle, The first thing a technician does is remove the ELD from the diagnostic port, which then makes that issue go away. And so the technician may have a harder time discovering what the issue is and tell the driver everything's fine, even though the culprit is sitting in his hand while they're connected. So we're also looking at two different types of access. One would be proximity based, which is what I just demonstrated in the video, where you've got, you know, either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. The other is a cellular connection, and many of these ELDs have an LTE or a cellular connection, which creates a significantly longer distance for those attacks. So how do we correct this? We see that there's a lot of code reuse. So one fix could fix a lot of different vulnerabilities. The cellular versus non-cellular versions often have the same code base in them. We've got the gateways in there, but also gateways can be susceptible to diagnostic protocol flaws. And then the issue is, this is a mandated technology, so drivers don't really have the option to just not use it, right? Go back to paper logs. So, it's a pernicious attack, especially when the device can worm itself and go from, even if we started an attack demonstrated on the runway, that truck could then go infect others. And, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to understand that these vehicles and this worm could exist across the entire fleet in the country pretty quickly. Okay, so how did we actually figure this stuff out? So let's start out with the device itself. So this is a popular ELD that we found on an e-commerce website. It's really small, holds in your hand. It's based on the Expressive ESP32 chip, right? So you can see that's exposed in the upper right-hand corner here. And there's a debug port that has a UART connection, and then there's a pin that you pull low in order to put it into a bootstrap mode and be able to actually pull the firmware from the ESP. And there's a tool that Expressive gives out for free called esptool.py, and it is the interface to that device, so you can pull and push firmware. It calculates checksums for you and so forth. So we set this up on the bench, and we have a legal CAN network here with some terminating resistors, the device itself, and we're plugged in with the power. We've got a switch and so forth. So definitely a student level, sharp student by perchance, but this isn't like a robust industry thing that's ready to go on the road. This is just on the bench. We do know that it's got Bluetooth and GPS. That's based in the manual, just reading the documentation that's posted online. But we also found a Wi-Fi network that was not in the manual. So let's start looking at that. So in here, we can do the strings command on the firmware that we pulled from the device itself. And we discovered a few things. There was an SSID and what appeared to be a Wi-Fi password that was right below there. There was an upload key that we ended up finding and an upload endpoint. So we have an IP address, an SSID, and a password, and an upload thing. So we were kind of excited to keep moving along this. We have found that it did not have any fuses set, so JTAG readout, so we could push and pull firmware from the device. And the default Wi-Fi credentials were also published in the ELD manuals, which was listed on the FMCSA website. And so those cross-correlated to the strings result from dumping the firmware. So we were pretty sure that was going to work. And so first thing is to actually check the upload. And so here's the page that is served by the ELD device over the Wi-Fi. And you can see the web interface there. So we could create a malware, right? Malware.hex, and then put in the upload key that we pulled from the firmware and send the file. And sure enough, it took that malware. So we were able to find a couple ports that were open too. So there's kind of two avenues of attack now. One of these ports, port 22, actually gave us the ability to send CAN messages from our laptop. And the other was we could update the firmware that would then just automatically send CAN messages. So how did we figure some of this out? Software reverse engineering. Right now, or at the time when we started this, both Ghidra, Binary Ninja, and Anger didn't have the actual language support for Extensa, which is the expressive instruction system. Ghidra seemed to have the most progress towards it, and so Jake actually did most of this work. So he basically built this out, found a handful of different projects, had to go backwards on a couple GitHub commits, and still was we're struggling to find the main entry point in the execution of this firmware. And it turns out that through some open source intelligence, there was a posting that was very applicable to this particular device. And so on the left, this was actually a open source thing, and through enough of this information, Jake was able to figure out the flows that he had discovered in Ghidra, and now assign those to RTOS tasks. And so that really accelerated, once you get a couple little nuggets like that, we really were accelerated forward and got to the point where we could actually write firmware. So now what we show on this page is the fact that in our we can write malicious firmware based off the original code, and there's a send CAN command. And so we've basically put together a torque command speed message, right, which is PGN0. And this is the payload that then stalls the truck while it's driving. And so we are demonstrating through the CAN dump logs the fact that we have write access to the CAN bus that's connected directly to the engine through the ELD device. So a couple of the highlights here, and these I think would be in the against the best practices that would post on telematics, but nevertheless we discovered those. Hard-coded weak password, simultaneous use of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. In other words, so the Wi-Fi is on while it's connected, so the driver would never even know if the car next to them while they're driving is connecting to their Bluetooth or to their Wi-Fi or not. Over-the-air updates and the system update, had that weak password, and it doesn't seem like the resellers changed any of the defaults, right? So the manufacturer created this, had these defaults in there, they ship it out, and they probably told the resellers to change it, but this was the same issue with home routers with password, admin passwords as the defaults, years ago. So now at least they change them each time. They had a debug thread open on port 22, and that gave specific commands where we could actually send CAN messages or even flood the network, and you could wirelessly reflash the device. There was an unauthenticated API, so you could actually do some streaming commands and be able to go through this series of commands to actually send out messages, right? So another, not only could we update firmware, but we could also just send stream commands as well. And then, so the result is here, right? So this is what happened the first time we got it. So as you listen to the noise in the background, you'll actually hear the engine, and when the attack actually initiates, the engine noise will change, and then we'll pull out ahead. We're going about 18 miles an hour on a runway on the Colorado State.
So you give it a couple moments, and it takes about 15 seconds for it to boot and it to.
We're going about 18 right now.
Okay. And then it will should here just a moment start streaming messages.
Okay. Yep, he lost power.
Yeah, I think
16.
There we go. That's the first for me.
Nice.
Wireless
drive-by
Yeah.
attack.
There we go.
So in the cab, this is what the driver, Rick, was experiencing. So you can see in the upper mirror, we're right next to the vehicle. All right, so we lost power, and his accelerator pedal is completely unresponsive. Right, he can't do anything, so he pulls over. Okay, so is this really a truck-to-truck worm? And the answer is yes, right? So because the ESPs can operate as soft access points, it can be both a access point and a client simultaneously. And since we know the upload URL and the IP address and the Wi-Fi password, it's very easy for us to create a program that will then go look for other devices that have the pattern for the Wi-Fi password. And so we decided not to do this on the actual device because there was a significant risk of it self-replicating. So we did it on some development boards with the same chipsets and discovered it's about 120-foot range with the built-in PCB antenna. So is this really realistic? So yeah, I drove through a truck stop and show you a picture on the left that I've connected to a truck in the truck stop with that device. And so if we have that ability, the launch point is innocuous, right? It's really hard to figure out where that would actually start. So we've got some more information about this at our systems cyber website at CSU. There's actually some data there that has the CAN bus traces from the wireless attack, the videos, and the presentations where we published this at NDSS at the VehicleSec conference this year. So we fixed this, right? So yes, the ELD producer did respond well to that vulnerability report. And we went through a responsible disclosure, got CISA involved, pretty quickly. They pushed an address or an update to address the issues. But why do these exist in the first place, right? So it's a mandated technology. The regulation says it's self-certified. So you have, there's no significant standards that are enforceable for security on these devices. And I don't think that the regulators at the time had any incentive to get this right? So there's no consequence to the rule maker if it's wrong, right? They're not the ones that get held responsible for it. So it falls on the vendors and the operators and the manufacturers to get this right. And so I don't think this problem is fixed. And we only looked at one ELD. I've got 7 of them sitting on my desk, and we're actually waiting for funding to get the students up to speed on getting more. So if you view this as an opportunity or as a need, certainly let me know, and I'd be happy to help you out. So thank you for your time, and I will be happy to address any questions. Oops.
All right, thank you very much, Jeremy. That's a very, very cool presentation. Next up, we have Shira. She will be talking about, she's from Upstream Security. She'll be talking about the general overview of the global automotive cyber landscape of 2024. Shira, you can share your screen now.
Sure, thanks, and it's great to be here and see everyone. So just a quick intro. Nod if you can see my screen. Yeah, I guess no one's all right, so I'm Shira, I'm from Upstream Security. We are a cybersecurity company focused on the automotive and mobility sector. So if you can think about CrowdStrike, then we are the CrowdStrike for connected vehicles. I've been with the company for 2.5 years now. Actually started my career as a Georgetown alum in Wall Street, and then gradually migrated towards marketing for tech companies. So I've been doing this for a long time. And since I joined Upstream, coming in, I knew a little bit about cyber, not so much about vehicles. I was driving my own, which was basically it. So it's been a crazy learning curve, and I've found this fascinating world. And all this discussion around ELDs will come to life again soon, so stay tuned. And what's interesting about Upstream is that in addition to providing technology and solutions for cybersecurity, we're also doing extensive research, which we're sharing with the community. So we have been publishing our annual automotive cybersecurity report going back to 2019. So what this has enabled us to do is to gain a broad perspective. So take all the fascinating discussion that we've had so far, and now let's zoom out and look at the entire landscape, and that will provide a bit of perspective as to the type of risk we're addressing, and we'll definitely touch on those ELDs. So let's jump right in. When we think about cybersecurity, the first thing that folks often measure is how many incidents have occurred. We've been tracking this going back to 2010. So you'll see Charlie Miller going somewhere in 2015, right? And overall, over the last almost decade and a half, we've seen 1,500 incidents that have been reported. Only 295 reported in 2023, and this sounds kind of low, right? In reality, what we're seeing is this is essentially the tip of the iceberg. But when it comes to automotive, we may have been looking for quite a while at the wrong number. And our findings in the latest report that was published in February actually shifts the focus to a totally new element that needs to be considered. Before we jump into that, let's look at the general overview of the landscape, right? So we've just heard from Jeremy about the ELD vulnerability, and Jeremy falls into the white hat bucket. Overall, in terms of cybersecurity activities, 36% are white hats, 64% of incidents are related to black hats. It means that the cybersecurity landscape is maturing into malicious intent, going from experimental to full-blown risk. In terms of the type of attacks, it's pretty clear 95% are remote. Only 5% of incidents that were reported last year were related to physical access to the vehicle. And within those 95%, and that's an interesting stat, 85% of incidents were long range. This means no hands on deck. It has no meeting where the incident was carried out from. And it could have been happening from anywhere in the world, attacking any vehicle, anywhere in the world. Physical proximity meant nothing. About 15% of attacks were remote, but short range. So they required maybe a Bluetooth connection, so no actual touching the vehicle, but still need to be close by. And now let's get to the point. What we've started to see from our conversations with customers, and at the moment, Upstream is protecting over 25 million connected vehicles. Many of the truck OEMs are our clients, including the biggest ones. So we've had quite a bit of experience. What we've started to hearing them talk about is, okay, the number of incidents is not high, but the impact is dramatic. So I said, okay, let's shift to measuring impact. And the first straightforward element of impact is scale. So we went back 3 years and we've analyzed each and every incident that was reported. So again, this is only publicly reported incidents. And we've tried to categorize what is the potential scale that the incident could have had. And overall, we're seeing pretty similar numbers, both in 2021 and 2022. About 20% of incidents had high or massive scale. Low means a few vehicles, medium is in the hundreds, high, we're already in the thousands, and massive, we're talking about millions of vehicles. So it's about a 20-80 split. Now, not to say that an incident that only impacts one vehicle is not dramatic. It could still, from a safety perspective, have dramatic implications. But from a scale perspective, we're looking at something quite stable. And here's what happened last year. And this is what we refer to as the cybersecurity inflection point. What we've seen is a dramatic shift from experimental hacking or low-scale hacking into high or massive scale hacking. So now, if we look back at last year, 1 of every 2 incidents had a very high scale of impact on vehicles on the road. And this is the big element that we wanted to share today. So at the moment, we're no longer talking about the number of attacks, but rather trying to measure the impact of each attack. And it's funny that you mentioned ELDs, and one of the major ransomware attacks that happened relatively recently is this ELD attack by another company. I think everyone recognizes who that is, but the sake of avoiding shaming, we'll not mention who that is. And what's interesting about this attack, and this is a real life ransomware attack, right? Black hats all in. It wasn't, the first time we saw it was on GitHub, where we started to see folks complaining that they're suffering outage of their ELDs. By the way, it's not just the ELD, it's also another inventory management system produced by the same vendor. It took from this, so this was around early September. Only come September 15th, we saw the media report this incident. We also got response from the vendor. What we do know is that because of the regulations, they had to switch to manual hours logging, which gave the vendor 3 weeks to fix the problem. Now, what we do know is by about September 28th, the problem was solved. All in all, we had 3 weeks of outage. You can imagine that the fleets that were using that ELD suffered dramatic operational availability challenges. Only we don't really know how many of them were put to a full halt. How this incident was resolved, the media did not cover as well. Whether it was through technology or they actually went ahead and paid, we don't know. But it was very interesting to see one of the very large scale attacks, and it's for clear reasons why they went after these devices. The direct impact on fleets is substantial, hence the higher odds that the ransom will be paid. So this is just one example of how we see the industry moving, and let's go a little bit deeper. Let's look at the attack vectors, right? When we're looking at the industry, and we've covered this actually a year before, we see several interesting attack vectors that are on the rise. And we'll talk about, so if something's on the rise, something has to be going down. We'll mention that in a minute. So let's go straight in. Infotainment systems, these kind of attacks are almost doubling from 2022 to 2023, and they now account for 15% of incidents. Why is that? It's pretty clear. If you think about Sam Curry and the API vulnerabilities that he found at a very popular infotainment system, that has the impact of over a dozen different OEMs. So the potential scale is quite dramatic. Telematics and cloud systems, those incidents are up from 35 to 43%. Again, scale plays a significant role in trying to explain why these attack vectors are more targeted by different hackers. But I want to shift attention to a different number here, and that's the APIs. Let me give you a bit of context. API-driven attacks, if we go back to 2021, they accounted for 2% of total attacks. By 2022, they were up to 12%, and we've now stabilized at 13%. The reason that we've seen such a sharp rise in API-related attacks is the level of know-how or threshold, and it's definitely lower than understanding how to hack a specific ELD or an ECU. That's complicated. But when it comes to API calls, if we think about Sam Curry or David Colombo, then it's a little bit easier when it comes to the APIs. Now, what we've learned is that there is a big discrepancy between what's covered in the media as API-related attacks versus reality. One of the things that we do, and let me open Brand for a sec, is we operate a vehicle security operations center for some of our customers. So on top of selling the technology, we essentially operate their SOC that monitors, live behavior of vehicles on the road. I can share that the vast majority of attacks that we see in our VSOC are API driven. So within the bucket of infotainment and telematics, a very large chunk of attacks are actually API driven. The reason that we split it separately is because we want to stay true to what's reported by the media. And it could be expected that reporters don't necessarily understand the technicalities of the attack, and being able to report that it was API driven is quite complex. Also, we understand that as it comes to the vendors or the OEMs, they may not share much information about the attack, so it's hard to infer that it was API driven. But from behind the scenes, this is the most significant attack factor that we can report. Now let's look at the other ones. ECUs are at 9%. There is a good reason for that. It's just really hard. And what we've seen is a big drop in remote keyless. Last year, it was at 16%. The reason is it's just less interesting from a financial perspective, right? We can certainly report that the vast majority of incidents are financially driven. Geopolitical or terror-related attacks only account for a fraction of incidents. So when it comes to financial motivation, stealing a car will get you X amount of thousands of dollars, but if you ransom out of an entire fleet, it's going to look completely different. Interesting to speak about EV charging attacks. And we're seeing a lot of white hat activity around that. So we're certainly in the early days of this type of attack vector, but we're already seeing real life attacks against EV chargers, both in the States and elsewhere. There was a very large incident last year that had to do with data leakage. So the data that's collected by these chargers and the systems that surround them is significant. So for good reason, we're seeing hackers attacking them as well. But this is something that we need to keep a close eye on. We're still in the early days, essentially an embryonic stage from a cybersecurity perspective, but this is something that will grow as the industry matures. Okay, any questions before we move on? Okay, so let me do a quick recap. So going back to 2023, 95% of incidents were carried out remotely. Of them, 85% were long range, 64% were performed by black hats with malicious intent, and approximately 50% of incidents had the potential to impact thousands, if not millions, of vehicles on the road. Okay, now that we've looked at the tip of the iceberg, let's go even deeper. One of the things that we do at Upstream to augment our technology and to some degree even enable it is we do threat intelligence. And we go into the deep and dark web, both for our own research and for as a service to our customers. And we try to understand the risks that are lurking for them in closed forums, closed social media channels, all sorts of blogs that are not accessible to me. What we've done, and this service is called Auto Threat, and what we've done and exposed for the first time this year, we've done deep analysis on 300 threat actors that are extremely active in the deep and dark web, and that they're specifically focused on automotive. So if it's a vulnerability discussed on Linux that has nothing to do with automotive, they're not in here. But if it's a Linux vulnerability related to an infotainment system, for example, then you'll see those threat actors in this analysis. If we look broadly, about a quarter are black hats, another quarter is white hats. Now, when it comes to researchers and they're active in the deep and dark web, sometimes it puts them in a different bucket of gray hats. And we've seen that growing, I wouldn't say dramatically, but we're seeing growth in that of white hats that it's unclear of exactly what side they're playing. But for the sake of this analysis, let's give them the courtesy of being white hats. But I want to draw your attention to another bucket, which is the fraud operators. Those are folks that are essentially trying to hack a system for their own gain, right? So they could be trying to mess with the heated seat premium cost, or they want to change the speed limit on their Tesla, or they're trying to mess with another system, or they're trying to crack a diagnostic system so they can operate their garage in a cheaper way. So these guys have actually deep malicious intent, and they're messing with the vehicles, and they're using cybersecurity methods. So it's an important group to look at. To try and understand the scale of what's going on, let's look at the guys that we are, or gals, that we're the most scared of. And those are the black hats and the fraud operators that have the highest level of malicious intent. And if you remember, when we analyzed the clear web incidents, we had a 50% mark of high and massive incidents. When we go into the malicious intent side, we're at 67% of activities that are targeting specifically a massive scale of assets. Again, financial motivation, not a surprise. When we're trying to analyze who they're actually targeting, then 41% would be targeting a specific OEM or vendor. 10% are going after a few, okay, several, and 48% of these hackers are going after global scale and impact. So if we think about, again, Sam Curry, he goes into the global. If we think about David Colombo, even though he was able to impact an entire, EV vendor, he still falls under the 41. Overall, we're seeing a shift towards, let's call them effective hacks, that are targeting assets around the world. And the fact that most of the attack vectors offer remote access in a long-range attack explains why they're targeting a scale at this massive scale. Let's just touch on what they're actually talking about. Most often, in the deep and dark web, they would be talking about vulnerability exploits, 50% of the chatter. That's understandable. But I want to draw your attention to the 12% of chatter that is focused on PII. Obviously, data is gold. And we've seen that with the massive data leakage that the EV charging operators suffered earlier this late last year. And in addition to that, the data could be monetized on its own merits. If we look into the vulnerability that Sam Curry discovered, he was essentially using the VIN numbers as the user for an API call. And in this case, he had to get those VIN numbers. And that's, again, goes back to trying to hunt for PII and use them elsewhere. The more that we use credit cards, and the more that cars can collect and trucks collect information about location, and in a fleet perspective, that is dramatic. If someone knows where the location of an entire fleet is, that is an operational risk that has to be considered. So this data is becoming more and more valuable for attackers, and we're seeing a growing chatter on that. Any questions before we take a quick example on the financial impact? All right. So before we kind of go into a touch on Gen AI, because we kind of have to, because everyone's talking about it, we wanted to show one last element of our analysis, and that is the financial impact. Thinking about scale is important, but we want to understand what it means to the OEMs and the vendors. In terms of how they're analyzing their risk internally and how they invest in cybersecurity. In this case, we've developed a framework that is not designed to provide a definitive answer as to how much a specific attack would cost. That is actually quite a subjective analysis. The meaning of this framework is to spark a discussion, a conversation, and to enable the different stakeholders to analyze specifically what it meant for them according to the different elements of the financial impact. And just to talk about the sheer magnitude of financial impact, we saw one of the largest ransom demands in history last year, and that was a ransom that was suffered by a Taiwanese tier 2. and they were asked for $70 million. We saw another very large tier one, European one, hit a few months earlier, again, in the dozens of millions of dollars, and this is just the cost of the ransom, not to mention everything else. Now, best to look at an example. And in this case, we're looking at a vulnerability. So this is a white hat activity that was published by TechCrunch in March of 2023. I think most of you will recognize which EV OEM that is, but again, for the sake of avoiding shaming, we'll avoid mentioning the name. And essentially what happened in this case is the researchers found a vulnerability in the gateway energy management system, essentially giving them direct access to the battery. Now, should the battery be disabled remotely, essentially it requires a recall to replace it. And this is where the high cost comes. Before we go into the analysis, just to give a framework, the severity obviously is very high. And though it is a white hat, it gives us a good perspective into the risk. The potential impact is fleet-wide, and in this case, the fleet size is over 3 million vehicles worldwide. And now let's look at the numbers. Within the framework, we've chosen to focus on 3 elements of cost in this case. The OTA updates to fix the vulnerability, which the OEM claimed in the media that this could be fixed over the air, which is the great advantage of software-defined vehicles. We've used a calculator provided by Aurora Labs to try and analyze how much it would cost to just push a critical OTA in a very short time frame. We're talking in the millions of dollars. The battery recall is obviously one of the heaviest cost elements. And in this case, if we take a very conservative cost per battery of $15,000, when it comes to trucks, not that many of them are electric these days, but as they do gradually evolve into electric, then we're seeing this cost will be very, very different. But for passenger vehicles, this is reasonable. And if we take a fraction of the fleet that was actually impacted, then we're in the dozens of millions automatically. All right, I'll wrap it up in a minute. Yeah, we have a few more minutes.
Oh, actually, our time is up. So can you wrap it up in maybe
Yeah.
like a minute? Thank you.
I sure will. And the last element is the legal implications that easily bring us to $50 million. We'll leave the Gen AI to the next chat. And from here, I'm happy to take questions.
All right. Do we have any questions? Actually, I have a question if no one asks a question.
Sure.
So, Shira, at Upstream, when you guys are doing your investigation, in the end, does that problem always come down to the technical part, or is it actually related to human?
So it depends, and sometimes it's malicious manipulation. And we've seen phishing attacks, which is really interesting, actually. They're both manipulating the natural behavior of the vehicle. We've seen an attack called the VinSpray, where essentially you would get a notification or infotainment system asking you to pair a device and telling you that this is a security check. So this is an interesting concept of how human behavior is being leveraged together with cyber methods to gain access to critical functionalities of the vehicle. So certainly phishing is becoming very lucrative to attackers.
Thank you for the answer. So next we're going to move on to the interactive session with the audiences. We have 3 questions here on the screen, and I invite you guys to type your answer, choose one of the questions to answer. And then you can type your answer in the chat box. And let's say we come back at 11:22 or 23, and then we can review those answers in the chat box. And in the meantime, the speakers, we can use this time to have a quick break, and then we will jump into the discussion at about 11:30. All right, let's start reviewing those responses in the chat box. Mark said we should first define operators. Are these the truck drivers or a person in the back office? The back process may vary. That's true. And second, schedule regular training sessions that have a hands-on technique included. Yep. And Jeremy said, question 3, avoid the blame and train model of telling the drivers what they did wrong. Secure by design with a loss-based approach or zero trust approach is best. Avoid overloading the operators and drivers with decisions that can lead to security incidents. Mark said, question 3, assess implementation of Gen AI to help build out factor-based defense. Yes, I was thinking about this just a few days ago, and I have something I can share later in the discussion. And Zap mentioned question 2. I would be very interested to see if Shira Upstream has some had any AI-related recommendations for training assessments. It seems like it would be a good fit and potentially result in some novel, interesting solutions. Testing users by sending out phishing emails has been shown to yield positive results if they click on the malicious link. It's both recorded and redirects them to training. No data exists that I know of to give an understanding if this is a one-time benefit or if it will actually result in better security in the long term. Greg said, question 2, Mark showed the lab and showed the cyber lab as a service. Incorporating more labs in real-world scenarios is the key to not only learning real-world skills, but also validating that the students was able to retain information, then apply information. Theory is always good, but in my opinion, students look for jobs need hands-on experience. It's very true. Todd said, question 1, Mark, I had the same thought. We have programs for our drivers and all employees on awareness, and then focus also within the IT and cyber teams on securing the data sharing and connection that we make to systems. As a carrier, we leverage associations like ATA and FATA, FMCSA, etc., to carry concerns and improvements back to the manufacturer providers. In terms of ELD, we work directly with providers of the service as a larger customer. Some discussions after that. And then Brian said, for question 2, training exercise. Sending fake phishing emails to employees and seeing the results within the organization. This applies to both carriers as well as the drivers. Jeremy said, question 1, make sure fleets and owners demand security from their device providers. Make security best practices are part of the purchasing requirements during acquisition. Independent verification is needed to avoid transitive trust. Thank you very much for your good response, good brainstorming. I forgot to introduce Todd Flores. I apologize for that in the beginning. I forgot to do that in the beginning. We have Todd Flores here. He is the Chief Information Officer at Essex Express Lines. He doesn't have a presentation, but he is happy to join our roundtable discussion later. Okay. If we don't have any response anymore in the chat box, we are going to move on to our roundtable discussion. Mark, are you ready?
I am here, and if I can figure out how to get my screen going. Okay, I guess that's right. Hello, everyone.
Do we have Shira ready? Do we have Jeremy ready and Brian ready?
Well, let me start with Shreya because I know there was some interesting information she was going to share on the AI, generative AI, and my thought turned to that in terms of human factors, right? So the attacker, right now, you're showing the statistics going to the black hat, the malicious attack. I'm sure there's some sort of technology that's leaning on AI to assist those operators. Could you share some insights into that? Is that everybody's doing it? So, I mean, my students all use ChatGPT, and I get it, and so what's going on in that space?
So when we talk about the inflection point and understanding that SOCs for OEMs or operators will need to tackle the challenge of massive scale attacks, then we have to think about how to mitigate these attacks, right? So what we've started doing is we've started to develop a layer that sits on top of our technology that enables to use Gen AI to effectively research and investigate an attack once it happens, understanding that we're going to have hundreds, maybe thousands of different vehicles related to the attack, and enormous amounts of data coming from the telematics systems. So the data challenge from a cyber investigation perspective is becoming almost too difficult to tackle. So if you only have one incident, one truck in your VSOC, your vehicle SOC, then it's okay, you can investigate. But if you need to mitigate within a few minutes to make sure safety is not compromised, then we've got to move fast. And this is where generative AI modules come to play. We've recently announced a product called Ocean AI, which is a layer on top of our XDR platform that does exactly that. It's already operational in a few very large OEMs, including a few commercial ones. And we're starting to see the analysts, the cyber analysts, using that more and more to mitigate the risk on scale. So the scale is not just causing challenges from a cyber and safety perspective, but how do you investigate? And this is how we've been using that. Talking a little bit about training, we have TTX. So think about those as simulations, like a flight simulator where we help our customers train their teams. And within creating the scenarios, we use Gen AI all the time to help us build the attacks according to criteria that we've defined in advance so that it feels like real life. So Gen AI is helping us not only on the mitigation side, but also on the training side, for sure.
Well, thanks for that. I think there's still some fresh ground there that we can cover and bringing it into not just training, but into the classroom. So in the presentation that Jeremy gave, the question right now is not exactly on AI target, but I'll get to that. So in Jeremy, in your investigation, your research there, Jake, your student did a lot of groundwork. Do you see some opportunities for AI being part of that research? And furthermore, how can we use, or might we use, AI to protect against this? Now, you showed a lot of detail in the embedded development. Maybe there's some practices or something like that that the engineers can use that, don't use an open JTAG port or something like that. So do you think AI not only in the reverse engineering role, that may be straightforward answer, but also in the defense role and in particular, do you see anything coming there soon?
Yes, I mean, so I guess to comment, my students certainly use Gen AI significantly, right? And the adversaries are going to be using it to accelerate their productivity, right? So I think you'll see the trend lines that Shreya was showing uptick with that AI, it's basically AI accelerated attacking, right? So you have to do AI defense as well. So some of the use cases I see for an AI is, keeping things from slipping through the cracks, right? So if you feed it a best practice, for example, that has things like close off the JTAG port or have unique passwords, it can help with some of that checklist type of security that I think is necessary but not sufficient. right? There's still going to be more that the human has to, understand. And a lot of it's not necessarily the fault of the AI, because it is a machine and it's probabilistic in many senses. So, if we say, for example, on this expressive chip, disable JTAG. Well, if it doesn't have a JTAG port, what does the AI do? Does it imply? Does it think it knows what you mean by JTAG, or does it actually look for the IEEE specification for that in the data sheets?
Mhm.
So I think there is definitely an opportunity, and I think defenders need to use it to make sure they're reminded of things. But I don't think it's sufficient to say, hey, I used an AI to help me secure this, therefore it's secure, is not an appropriate conclusion.
So if we jump to Brian, then taking it another step back into regulation. So Jeremy, one of Jeremy's recommendations are the regulations or best practices, let's say guidance instead of regulations. So, your guidelines from your fellow agencies like the NHTSA, the cybersecurity best practices, you think you can look through there and you could see some things like don't use JTAG and all those best practices. So from your side, do you think do we need more of that type of information presented to a different audience in terms of the trucking audience? Or is it maybe that we've got these good guidance and references from other associations? What else can you build on it? And then how do we assess that your guidance is actually working
Right.
well? We don't want to make the same, we don't want to trip ourselves up on the same thing again, right?
Right. I think I agree. And, putting out a best practice is one thing, but, what do you do to make sure that these companies are out there following them? And that's one thing that FMCA is looking at, is how to extend our outreach, whether it's partnering with, NMFTA, got all these carriers and, just using industry to promote these best practices. And so we're trying to look at more efficient and effective ways to make sure that people are going to follow this. And like I stated before, we're actually looking at improving ELD requirements too. So that could be a big step forward, and making sure that these best practices are actually implemented within industry, because we understand that there are some safety implications, as well as, people's personal information that could be at risk when it comes to like these attacks.
So how can you figure, a lot of things that we're talking about today, right, is human factor related. How can you figure that into, how can you calculate that into guidance, Brian? Is it hard to do? I would think so. Have you thought about it?
It would take some thinking. I probably have to get back with you on that. We'd have to sit down and actually, figure that out, because there's a lot of things that goes into human factors. I mean, you can do training, but I've seen people, for example, when I brought up the whole email thing, right? I myself, I know not to click on certain emails, but in certain situations, I may make a mistake, right? And it has happened before. So, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that realm.
Xiaojian, what about you? Are you doing some research in this area? I know you're collecting data, and I know you might want to provide that feedback and that information to Brian and other government or other associated resources. Do you see that? I mean, do you see clearly your human factors guide? Do you see where we need to go right now, or is it still kind of a cloudy horizon? What are your thoughts?
I would say it's still kind of cloudy. I could see that human factors has a role in cybersecurity, but what I'm trying to do here at BTTI is that I'm trying to gather as much as information I can from cybersecurity, from heavy vehicle, and then put them into my human factors mindset, and then identify those human factors related risk in cybersecurity. That's one of these projects I'm doing right now for at VTTI. That's a CCI project. And actually, just a couple of days ago, I was just thinking about AI and how could we use AI to bring AI into this realm and fight against those bad actors. And one of the things that crossed my mind is that maybe this is an open question for everyone in this room, which is I'm thinking about, because I do a lot of behavioral driver related data collection and experiment here at VTTI with our heavy vehicle simulator. That we're currently doing a few projects on level 2, level 3, level 4 autonomous vehicle studies, measuring truck driver distraction, their eye gaze data, their all the behavioral biometrics data. And one thing that crossed my mind is that from a technical standpoint, could we do something like could we build an AI model or some machine learning algorithm? We train them, and then they monitor the behavioral biometrics data of truck driver. And if some pattern, some behavioral pattern goes off, and then the system asks the truck driver on board, or maybe it's a remote driver, for another round of authentication. I just had this idea a few days ago. So it's still a pretty early idea. I haven't done any deep literature review in that already. I haven't done that. Maybe someone has already done this in the industry, or maybe upstream has already done something on this from the truck driver behavioral biometric standpoint. So yeah, I would like to hear any thoughts, any comments on this from you guys.
Jeremy, do you think there's any opportunity for the Pivot program that you're working on to share information in this space? I know there's a lot of data collection going on there. Do you think human factors is opportunity?
Yes. We have an active project right now where we are looking at collecting data across many different drivers driving the same truck around the same route to see if there's a way to identify them or distinguish them based off of the CAN traces. And so we're looking at specifically the signals tied to the driver controls, accelerator pedal, and then also like braking rates and so forth. So it's the data collection effort itself. I think we're into 12 drivers with a goal of getting 50 drivers by the end of the summer. I don't know if it's going to work, honestly, because there's a lot of noise in there. The use case for this would be as kind of a secondary evaluation to learn the identity or to monitor the identity of the driver, right? So there are some shipments that are very high value or high risk where if a driver gets out to go to the restroom and a different driver gets in, we would want to know that, right, fairly quickly. So this is a more of a passive examination of the data to see if there's a potential flag for that. So I'm not sure. I am skeptical, but at the same time, I think collecting the data and seeing if it's viable is certainly a worthy exercise. And we have the facilities in the truck to do it. So we're hopefully going to be able to publish some of that this year. We did get a paper accepted in a conference on the collection techniques and methods, but we haven't finished the data collection yet.
Hey, Todd. Thanks, Jeremy. Hey, Todd, were you going to say something? I didn't mean to cut you off.
I actually had a question, right? And probably a couple of comments. Those that don't know me, I talk a lot. So if you let me, I will.
But Jeremy, the collection methods for the CAN data that you're leveraging, right? Like, can you say things like 50 drivers in a truck on a route? Like, how intrusive are those collection methods? Because like, there's a little bit like I say things like a carrier, and Xiaojian said, you know, I'm the CIO for Estes Express Lines. I have 12,000 drivers, right? Like, in 12,000 trucks that run 600 million miles a year, right? So there's, when you start talking about research needing data, like I honestly think like I struggle with some of the heavy duty like truck security stuff because like to your point, the stuff that you're researching and others are researching, there's not a lot I can do about it other than like pressure the manufacturers, right? And we do that, as I was saying in the chart through, or in the chat, through the associations and those sorts of things. But one thing I can do is like, I have a crap ton of data over hundreds of millions of miles over several years, with the ELD mandate going in 2017, right?
Mhm.
So there are certain things, because there's not a lot of PII in that data, I can associate it back to a driver on a route, but you can't, right? Like, so if you could identify patterns, we could do the association. I just don't know how intrusive the collection mechanisms are, because I think the only way we solve these problems is by people being more open and working together. We had a ransomware event last October, had nothing to do with our vehicles, but I chuckle when folks share things like the largest ever ransomware demand at $70 million. I'm like, that just means people aren't reporting what the ransomware demands are they are getting.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm trying to figure out how I can help.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So I purposefully have not asked carriers for data yet for this project because I don't want to create a flurry of work on a theory that doesn't have merit, right? So we're doing that exploratory research right now to see if there is something. To answer specifically your question, the invasiveness. So we are recording the entire CAN bus at the time, which typically telematics will not push up to the back end. So it does require the additional introduction of a logger at this point. So there's going to be a different fidelity of the data if we try to compare your historical records to the current ones that we're getting. We also, and this is kind of interesting, and you may be interested in this too. Since we own the truck, we can cut wires, and we actually inserted a middle machine device in the instrument cluster. And so we have a protocol that has been approved to, while the stranger is driving, we actually launch a cyber attack against the instrument cluster, and it woofs it. Everything dings up, all the bells and whistles go off. And some of them, they just pull over out of reaction, like what the heck is going on? And at the same time, we have a heart monitor going. So there's a human factor component there to see like, what is the typical physiological response to these kind of unknown or surprising events. So it's in the Kenworth, the instrument CAN bus is separate from the engine. It goes through what's called a CECU. And so we don't actually change the operation of the truck, but we do certainly affect the driver's perception of its operation. And there's varied levels of it. Like we could just kill the RPM and speed needle and just make it go zero, even though they're moving. Well, it's like, that's weird. But when you start doing the audible with the seatbelt chime and everything, and all the flashes going off at once, then it's clearly a non-normal issue that has raised a little bit of alarm. So there's going to be some interesting results that come out of this, I think. Obviously, I don't want to do that to your fleet because that's a lot of wires to cut. So anyway, stay tuned. Hopefully it'll be interesting when it comes out.
Yeah, cool. So Todd, maybe just sticking with you for a second or two more. I mean, in terms of human factors, we talk about the driver here. It's like Jeremy does a attack and the dashboard goes crazy. But where do you think, what's your point of view, where the most vulnerable point is in the whole operation for human factors? Is it really a driver? I guess they can get in a crash. Is it a technician who's plugging a bad scan tool in? Is it somebody that clicks a bad download? I think the answer is probably everything, but maybe there's something,
Yeah.
the back end guys have been trained over and over and over again, right? So where do we turn to this? It's clicking the button or punching the screen. What are your thoughts there?
Right. Like Shira talked a little bit about like API attacks and those sorts of things. And to your point, Mark, like my folks are trained on that. Like how do they connect? My drivers aren't leveraging APIs, et cetera. So you've got drivers in cab. One thing you didn't talk about from an ELD perspective on here, because you're very focused on the CAN bus and the operation of the vehicle. Oh, all of those systems have workflows and they enter data that goes into backend systems and those sorts of things. They're on, as you were pointing out, relatively open, moving Wi-Fi networks inside the cab. They connect to third-party cellular networks. They're designed to fail over if one of those networks fails. You've got, we didn't talk about SIM spoofing or any of that kind of stuff that occurs, and there are certain carriers that are worse at that than others. So there's all of those things. Then you have the technicians who are they grab a laptop out of the shop and they plug it in, right? Like, and by standard, you're kind of told to keep all those networks separate because they're your biggest kind of Swiss cheese on your network. But on the human factors side, like the area we didn't really talk about was other functionality that rides along with an ELD, right? Like workflow management, all of those sorts of things, because my goal as a CIO for, the largest privately held trucking company in the country is to keep my drivers driving, right? Like we ask them to do a lot of data entry these days because when you're providing a service, customers want to know where their package, where their shipments are, all of that kind of stuff. So we're trying to automate as much of that as possible, which creates like interfaces in the cab. It does some of those sorts of things from a human factors perspective. I think the other thing you may struggle with, as much as like, Xiaojian was talking about leveraging cameras for driver behavior. You want to talk about a thing drivers hate? Having an inward facing camera that can track their behavior. So the adoption in the marketplace isn't really there. So that's why I was really interested in where Jeremy was headed on, like, can I ascertain other things where I'm not watching the driver, that I can make some of those determinations? Quite frankly, in that scenario, my first thought was theft, right? Like somebody else is now driving this truck in the middle of a run, right? Like, so I think you're going to struggle a little bit there. Over time, I think you'll see more and more of that. Like all of the LD vendors are going that way. They have inward facing cameras that leverage computer vision and AI to like track eye movement and do those sorts of things. You just have a historical population that hates being tracked. That's why they drive a truck at night. Like, so there's extra challenges there that you might not have in an airplane, right? Like pilots are used to being watched, drivers are not.
Yeah. So that's really good insight. Thanks for that. So one question in the chat that you put out there, and I'm gonna turn it to Brian to reflect on. In the ELD itself and the issues there, but more importantly in the organizations that share information, right? So you're an operator, Todd. Brian, you probably interact mostly with either fleet operations or associations like ATA and MFTA, et cetera. Coming from an engineering world, I mean, I feel privileged. I touch and work in those organizations, but I'm also in SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers. So in those technical meetings, OEMs are there day in and day out. And I can tell you there's not a very good channel of information coming from Todd, a person like yourself, into an engineer that's sitting in that technical committee writing specifications that OEMs are going to implement either in hardware, firmware, or vehicle systems. So, Brian, is that a place you can help with an agency? I don't know. I mean, there's maybe some go-between there that I mean, you carry a nice banner, sir, and you're neutral too, right? Or at least, you play a level, on the level. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's opportunity there. And, I'm still building up my network, right? I'm still fairly new within FMCSA, so I'm meeting all these new faces. I've talked to NMFTA, NIST, ATA. ATA has their Watch, which I've been reaching out to them to find out more about and how, maybe FMCSA can get involved, because like communication is key, right? Between all these industry stakeholders. I think that's a pretty important thing. And that's one of the things, that's one of the outreach is the top thing on my on the
Yeah.
road I'm
So
working on.
here's something specific that maybe is helpful, and maybe, Jeremy, you, Todd, whoever can chime in, is that in ELD, as you know, there's 6 messages, and one of them, 5 of them are broadcast, and one would be, on request. And I've always wondered, I mean, I'm one of the guys who helps develop the messages. Why couldn't we create a ELD message that a truck is designed to broadcast, that a secure handshake is made when the ELD is mated with the truck, that we know, some of the capabilities, and that, there's a specific message that has more security. It's not perfect, but more security behind it, that then, would flow through your back end, Todd. I mean, why couldn't we do that? Would that help? Maybe, is it helpful, or?
Well, the regulation pushes you back to year 2000 for compliance. So I think that's the issue, is the backwards compatibility with the existing fleet. That's
gotcha.
right. So, I mean, it's because of that right access that things are really kind of challenging. Because the original intention wasn't to have right access by unauthorized devices, and we didn't have to worry about it back then because it was an air gap and there wasn't a requirement. And like I actually have a patent on a CAN data diode that allows traffic to only go one way. But that doesn't, I still have to have that engine hours on the network in order for that to work. And I don't think Todd wants to pay the hundreds of dollars per gadget to put on each truck just to mitigate a potential risk. So it's an economic issue. Like, well, I thought it was a great idea, so that's why I did the work on it. But
so Todd, we got about 4 minutes left. What do you think? It's only a couple $100, sir.
Yeah, it's only a couple $100 times 12,000 cows.
Right.
And here's the funny thing, like I just did it last year. So like we switched out ELDs last year. Now the thing is to Jeremy's point, it's that backward compatibility, right? Like we might have trucks on the road 15 years. So that tends to be the struggle with some of the stuff that you're trying to do. I would go back a little bit, and Brian, quick question. Do you know Joe Orr?
I've heard the name.
Joe Orr is in an MFTA, and he's trying to drive some more of the cyber conversation across associations as well. So I'm talking to him as well.
Yep, I've talked to them on a couple of occasions. Yep.
Him and Debbie. So and it's so hard, Mark. Like you guys are all way smarter than me, right? Like I'm just a dumb CIO. Like I go implement new features and solve business problems. So to Jeremy's point, right? Like when you come to hundreds of dollars, I'm like, how likely is it that this is an issue for my fleet, right? Like now I've got to worry about Jeremy's students driving by my trucks, but other than that, I feel pretty good. Like, and I shouldn't, but I do.
Yeah. So, Xiaojian, you know, there's only 3 minutes left, and I want to, you know me as well. I can talk along. I'd like to give you back the floor here and see what your reflections are, and before we wrap up the session today.
Yeah, honestly, I already feel very happy the moment I was able to get you guys together, sit down and start this conversation. I'm the guy that's waving the flag of human. We have to know it's human right here. Once this conversation started, once this relationship started, I think I have a good feeling that we're gonna do some good projects together and maybe some collaboration together. That's my reflection from this workshop, and I really, really appreciate all the speakers here today Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for valuable knowledge. And honestly, I don't have anything after this workshop other than my lunch. So I'm happy to stay here as long as you guys would like to keep on with the discussion.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you all. I'm gonna probably drop out and move along here, but it's been a great discussion, and I hope you don't mind me asking some of these silly questions here, but the point really is to get some conversation, as we just heard, and I think we can make things better. From my point of view, it's on a heavy duty truck, I feel responsible, and I don't laugh at that, but I do, because we never, and when we were making J1939, we never thought of these cybersecurity issues. So now we have an opportunity to do better, and it may take some while, but we'll find a way forward. So I appreciate all of that great feedback and great research.
Well, and I need to run too, but the thing I would throw out, like, regardless who it is, right? Like, we had a cyber attack in October. Everybody I talk to in the quiet lunches and dinners that we have is, if you're unwilling to admit you're going to get attacked and you're unwilling to admit you're going to get sued, it's not worth having a conversation. And once you admit those two things, we can share lots of data and information. We've been very open and public about ours. It helps being privately held. But we worked with CISA, like we do all that stuff. So if there's anything I can do to help any of you, like, I have lots of data. Like I said, we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 12,000 cabs. Like, we've got that many drivers in the line haul division, then we've got city drivers, we've got all kinds of stuff. So I'm willing to help. And I'm willing to share data where I can, recognizing that y'all are smarter than me, so you may ask me things I don't understand.
I think working together, that's how our team gets better. That's how we all improve. So thank you. I'm going to jump now. Have a great day, Xiaojian. Thank you. If you want to stay on, I'm going to connect with you a little later.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you. Thank you, audience.
See you all.